John was sitting there listening, and later on he asked me at that time to join the band. And we went to, I went to his house. I found that he lived not too far in Queens. I went to his house, began to talk to him, began to tighten up with his present day thought, and we ended up on the road together, going on the way with the station wagon from New York, going to Chicago, to the Birdhouse, to do a gig. Wow. And we passed through, during that tour, California, St. Louis, Chicago, I can't even think of all the places, but many places, Detroit, Minor Key, and we began to get tight. There's another story there in that I tell a lot of people, a lot of musicians, that during those days, even though we had to stay in the car instead of on a plane to get to the gig, you could be working together for 2 weeks straight, 2 weeks in one spot, tightening up the music, honing your craft, developing your ideas. Now, if you have 2 days in a club, you're lucky. So it's a situation where you have to find other places to work, other places to hone your craft, other places to shed. And that was the institution that I know about. The institution of the bandstand was a very important one that a lot of young people don't get the opportunity to deal with today. It happens very, very seldom. That's why we do programs where we try to get students involved with more and more and more performing before an audience.
Right, right. I was wondering if you could actually talk a little bit more about that, because that's something that I'm curious about, kind of the disparity between the way musicians learn today to some extent and the way we'd learned in the past in terms of, performance being the, major dynamic component of learning. I mean, when you're saying honing your craft, did you experience, and also in relation to Coltrane, feeling of, I understand that Coltrane in some ways experimented himself a lot on the bandstand. Did you feel encouraged to do that yourself, and did you have breakthroughs through successive dates in the same place?
Well, you had to do that yourself. I mean, I remember reading somewhere where most of the musicians then felt if you did not experiment on the bandstand or bring something to the beach besides sand, that you are not qualifying. You do not fit. Therefore, when I was with John, I remember, it's funny that I read Miles said the same thing to him that he said to me. Once I went to him after joining the band and said, John, I really want to do my best. What do you want me to do with this song or that situation or the other? And he said, well, Workman, I don't play bass. I'm having a hard enough time with the saxophone. He said, if I wanted to play bass, I'd have a bass. I can tell you what to do with the bass. If you ask me about the saxophone, I could tell you. And it made a lot of sense to me. In other words, he said, I got you because of what you do. Now do something with it. That was a very powerful, it took me a long time for me to understand what he was trying to say to me. I didn't know it right at the spot. I'm a young boy trying to do a good job. And at the time, I didn't know what he was saying. Later, I knew what he had in mind.
That's really interesting. Actually, that sort of answers another question that I had in some ways, is that I was wondering how much Coltrane sort of gave you any kind of direction in terms of your bass playing, and it seems like he really let you stretch out on your own with that. But now sort of tying it in particularly to something that we're going to listen to shortly, which is Olé, on that same Atlantic recording that we heard before. With this, I interviewed Art Davis a little while ago, and he was talking about this as the two-bass concept. I don't know if those were the words that you would use, but the idea is that Coltrane featured on a number of recordings around that time two bass players, and you were usually one of them.
I want to ask you to digress with me for a minute, because you said something that's...
I'm going to digress just to let everyone know that that's Reggie Workman's voice, the bassist with John Coltrane. So if you're tuning in, that's Reggie Workman. Our program director, Laura Wellickson, is conducting an interview. This is happening live on the John Coltrane Festival, WKCR-FM, New York. It's 4:08, and back to our digression. Reggie Workman.
Thank you, Phil. You said whether he gave us direction. Yes, he did. He had ideas about the music that he would want to do. Like, as I walked into the studio, I heard the Homie Dance, and he told us, what that melody, what that idea was, an African folk song. Where it came from. He told us that it's a song that was sang around the festival every year for the African in diaspora, and it was something about an ode to those Africans who went forth and hoping that some of their children would come back to the shores of Africa. He studied that. He knew that. He had a lot of stories behind if it was nothing more than a bass line, there was a story behind it that came from some folkloric experience that he read about. John was a person who often read, practiced 24/7, and he would share some of that with you. He would sit you down to the piano sometime and show you a tone row or a chord progression and explain to you that this is where my mind is now. I'd like you to explore this with me, and in doing that, we're going to do this tune or the other that sounds like this. And another thing that happened during that time, musicians were responsible to know what everyone else was doing. It wasn't about like opening the Unreal book and finding out what the music is. It was about listening and knowing and understanding what everyone is doing. So like Miles said in one book that I read, that he expected the musician to know the tunes. He would get worried if he had to hire somebody who didn't know the tunes he wanted to play. That was something that was expected then. So as we go onto the campus now, which is taking the place of the bandstand that we experienced when we were younger, we try to carry the musician through all of that repertoire and encourage them to carry themselves through that repertoire, so that when they come to the bandstand and somebody calls a tune that they are not used to playing, that they would at least have some familiarity with it.